Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Love every time we get together with this gentleman because he applies life to science, or maybe it's the other way around, but it gives us a deeper understanding of what's going on in life. And he's worked on this for many years in many different areas, having lots of eureka moments involving social phenomena. And we've talked before about a lot of current events and looking at it through the eyes of science. He's got an amazing memoir. He's done lots of teaching, lots of writing, and we're going to look at 5 fundamental things that need to be in place to pilot your life forward and maybe give you some understanding in terms of why things are happening the way they are happening. He's our professional of the year. Grant Venerable joins us once again here on the program. How are you doing today, Grant?
I'm fine, Stephen.
Been a lot of things going on lately. We talked about and we don't do politics. We just look at it. We look at the facts, and we've done that in the past when it comes to the late 2024 elections. And I know that's something on your radar. We talked a lot about polls and how they all come together. Certainly the wildfires in California on all of our minds, prayers, and our radar. Where should we begin today?
Let me begin with where I began with a system through which to understand reality and life. And namely, after I came through intense and extensive studies of chemistry in college and graduate school, I was gaining an understanding of structure through molecular structure, through chemical reaction process. So let me just touch base here. Am I still on target here?
Yeah.
As far as okay. I want to get into what I uncovered probably before I started teaching in college at Cal Poly State University, San Luis Obispo, is that our systems work best, that humans make, when they emulate nature's systems. Because nature started making systems a much longer time ago than humans did. And humans go off the track when their own system designs diverge too much or at all from nature systems. And the most important system for us in terms of natural systems is the system of life that we call life. And this construct that I ran into and developed some years ago, around 1980, formalized it as the Venn matrix of a system contains these properties. In fact, it was derived from 3 different bases. One is from the theory of groups in algebra, which defines the structure of a mathematical system. And another is to do a system of interrogation, to look at various natural systems, whether it's a bacterium or a redwood tree or a human being, and just distill out what is the absolute irreducible set of traits that a system must possess in order to survive and thrive. So the Venn matrix is a combination of the algebraic definition, which youngsters used to learn in high school. It's not taught too much anymore because people have got so, quote, practical that they don't deal with it because they say, well, the people aren't going to need this to get a job. And we discussed some months ago about, well, what's that got to do with anything? There's a prior development that has to be done on understanding our own minds and understanding the structure of the universe and how the mind reflects the universe. So let me get into what I'm really about here. The first domain of the Venn matrix is purpose. It's domain A. And what is the purpose of a system? It is that which enables the system to survive and thrive, to fulfill itself if it's a human being. So that's it. Purpose is survival and fulfillment. If a system is failing to do that, it is not a very good system and needs to be redesigned. Our systems for life got thrown off. I'll say a little bit at first, but they were optimum. And we've covered this a little before. They were optimum as long as people stayed in their rural farms. When their predecessors first came to this country, the Native Americans were already here. But as long as people's lives were being shaped by the natural properties of the earth and all of the things of the earth, then they tended to develop life structures that supported that. And so the first structure was the family, but that's where things kind of went astray, because as people came in from the farm to get higher paying jobs around 1800, the farms diminished, and the ethic or the ethos that was learned by being farmers changed, and the purpose left being survival and fulfillment. It became something else. It became an entire economic system designed to make profits for the owners of the systems or the companies. So that's what happened. So we lost the services of the extended family, not the nuclear. The nuclear didn't show up until the Industrial Revolution, when people atomized. Their families changed into atomic kinds of conglomerates of a couple, of a father and a mother who had 2.5 average children, and they moved into the cities, but they lost the support of the extended family of relatives and close friends and teachers. Are you with me so far, Stephen?
I am. And I want to jump in here with something you said at the very beginning, because I find it fascinating. You said the best systems in our world are the ones that emulate, call it nature, or maybe the
Yes,
animal world.
yes,
Is
yeah.
there an example that you can give us how we might follow that system for best case scenario for us?
Well, I think at this stage, since we left the farm, we have to, in a way, duplicate the farm in our urban lives. And that's what I've done as much as possible. Uh, I've stayed close to and been a support of the extended family that was left to me and my siblings by our ancestors. And that has been a lifesaver in many cases, because that extended family operated the way a whole, organic, realistic family in nature is supposed to operate. When certain members face problems that they have to solve, the extended family comes in and begins to solve those problems. There's no formalistic rules about how that's supposed to be done, because it's worked out naturally in communication, conversation. Who has what resources? Who has need of what resources? So, and then until we can put that in our educational systems, that's probably the only way we can do it, because not doing that has affected that little word called politics. So we could have a politics that is organic and serves the survival needs of people, or we have a politics that's strictly competition between competing forces in which one force is trying to subdue the other force. It doesn't work. And that's what we're seeing now. We're coming to the end of that period. I might call it the end of politics, or at least politics as it's been practiced. And we hear a lot of talk about, well, America has the best democratic or whatever Republican system in the world, and because nothing is better, and that leads us into not paying attention to what will work. And there have been plenty of ideas advanced, but those ideas are not picked up until we have a crisis like the fires. But we have the same crises with hurricanes. We have with these, so we have natural exogenous events, as economists call it, events from the outside that can force us, if we're allowed to, redevelop and renew our systems so that they function properly. Well, as the governor of California just said in the last day or so, we need a Marshall scale plan to redevelop the burned out areas of Los Angeles. And many of those areas were in fact where many of my relatives and friends now live. And there hasn't been any loss of life among them, but I'm certainly keeping my eyes on that.
Weren't you involved in I don't know if it was wildfires or a fire related situation years ago?
Well, the Watts riots, as it was called, was a fire situation. But it was set by people who were protesting the conditions under which they had to live in Los Angeles. And of course, this was racial culturally aligned. And so you had different classes of people living in different conditions. But what was the trigger with Watts in 1965 was television. And that the people that lived in the Watts area, which was maybe one of the lowest income areas of Los Angeles County, could actually see how people were living in Bel Air and Pacific Palisades and up in Pasadena and other places that had more resources. And there was a trigger that involved, people got impatient. I think there was an arrest by the police and things just snapped. And one thing led to another. First thing you knew was that buildings were being set on fire and looted. And that spread way up into the neighborhood 6 miles north of Watts, where my family lived, where I grew up. And that was the first conflagration in fire that I'd ever experienced. My house was saved. However, the commercial area just half mile up the street on Vermont Avenue was starting to go up in flames because of people who were looting, and then they just set things afire. And that kind of thing is, it's not happening like that in the Pacific Palisades fire, but the result is the same. And after it was over in about 4 days, and the National Guard was called out to keep people curfewed in their areas and keep non-residents out, then Los Angeles was in for a major change. All the insurance underwriting requirements were changed so that some people could not get home insurance, fire insurance after that, or it was a higher cost. So that was the first. And interestingly, it occurred just days before I left for graduate school at the University of Chicago and drove with a college buddy of mine from the chemistry major at UCLA. And then the next example of that was the Bel Air fire of 1961. The Watts fire was Yeah, that was after the Bel Air fire. So the Bel Air fire was 4 years before Watts. But the Bel Air fire was more like Pacific Palisades. In fact, it was next door, just east of Pacific Palisades. So uh, what we're seeing now, as I move down to some of the other properties of an optimum system, the B property is that an optimum system has all the resources it needs or can develop to survive and fulfill our human existence. And then property C has to do with being able to have communication and supply channels. You're starting to see the point here, I think, with fires. D was having a strategic vision for uh, planning and changes that come about. How do you renew? Well, that's the next thing you do after a Pacific Palisades kind of fire. But do you have the resources, the abilities? Do you have the people? Do you have the organizations who can actually do that? And then you have E, which is the most non-understood of all five principles of an optimum system. And the universe itself has an organizing principle. And simply put, it's made up of the basic laws of physics and chemistry. So if we apply those same laws to our social systems, we can achieve what the universe, what nature has achieved in fostering the development and the survival of the various species of plants, animals, the vertebrates, the invertebrates, the fishes, the whales, the birds, everything. Okay, does that make sense?
It does, as I put the pieces together. And you had mentioned earlier the principles, and I believe we're talking about five here. The first one also includes our purpose. And I love talking about that because I think many of us don't know what our purpose is. Why are we here? You know, you look at it was a great movie that came out probably 20 something years ago, maybe more. It was called A Dog's Purpose. You know, when we talk
Uh,
about, other species,
yeah,
their purpose is defined. They know what their purpose is from the beginning. As
yeah,
humans, I don't know that we're
yeah.
really sure about that. What's your take on that? And also, how does one determine their purpose?
Wow. By staying alive, by surviving, and trying to find that E principle, namely what is that unifying, organizing ethos of beliefs and values. And the closer your beliefs and values accord to what we could call the universe's beliefs and values, which sounds a little bit strange to say, but that's really been the purpose of religion, is to deal with that gap between these hidden values of the universe, which are the laws of the universe that tells us we can't jump off of a 20-story building and expect to survive very well because of gravity. We cannot take gravity, the laws of gravity, out of existence. They don't expire.
Hmm. So
So that's really sets the tone, the basis to have the whole conversation over how's LA going to rebuild after the fire? And that's the question, because the dividing lines come when people start pointing fingers and erroneously try to sort out the causes. And they sort out like just one cause. They say, oh, it's because of the one governor in the past didn't build the number of reservoirs that were needed to put out fires. Okay, so, but there's other considerations as well that accord with these five A, B, C, D, E domains that I just mentioned.
mhm.
And unless those things are covered, there's not going to be any survival or fulfillment. It just reverts to a jungle, Stone Age state of being for humans.
You're very much plugged into the wildfires because you're from that area. Originally spent a lot of time there, at least that. And you're connected to people there. Um,
Right.
in your view, could anything have been done differently?
Not in that case, not in the case of the recent fire,
Yeah.
because everything was set in stone as to how people were organized, what resources were available or not available. And that's where the finger pointing has to just cease and desist. It has to go to a Marshall Plan for renewal. LA has to redesign its whole urban system of how it exists. There's no getting around that. And there's ways to do that. And this is my way of addressing that with the Venn matrix of a system.
Mm. You
And it really takes a good university educational system to lead the way on that. I mean, they're all there in Los Angeles. There's UCLA, where I went. There's there's Caltech and any number of universities in the area. They all possess the means to do that. But now the universities are under attack for by certain politicians for being too what they call liberal, which I'm not sure what that means, but there it is.
I detect that you have found your purpose in your life's work. This is your passion, looking at
Yes.
the science end
Yeah.
of things and how it applies. Final question here: what does that feel like, knowing that you're in your purpose, you're where you should
Well,
be?
I'll tell you something funny. I think I just figured it out in the last 3 weeks, in the sense that I've known what it is, but I've never claimed it as my own fully to share with others. And now I know. So that's where I'm going next in my existence, is to root myself in showing the relationship, the inexorable relationship of the laws of chemistry and physics to human and social well-being. Because there is the unifying principle, domain E, affects whether people ascribe to that or not, or want to ascribe to that. I don't think many of my science professors would have really advocated for me to have that as a purpose. It was just a little too far beyond them when I was in college a long time ago. But now I think there's a little more recognition, and that's what I intend to do, is to show how chemistry, at least reactions, can show us what to expect when there are social reactions and processes, because there's a whole gap between the start of something and the finish of it. Like between the start of a fire, it's going through the destruction, and then the finish in producing a whole new system. But there's a lot in between. Unless you recognize what comes between start and finish, it you don't get to the finish, you don't renew it properly.
I appreciate all the insight today. Interesting that we look at things through a different lens. We go through life, many of us not thinking about the scientific view of things. And I will always remember our conversations about the election and the polls and the polling process, and how what we think is one thing is really, really not that. Great having you on here today.
Well,
You,
it's great to be here.
you have so much knowledge, and just the insight. Gives us something to think about. And I appreciate your transparency, in terms of even in the last few weeks about your purpose. I think it's normal to question that all the time. Why are we here?
Yes. And it has to be questioned all the time until one really says, this is it.
Thanks for being here today. Appreciate it.
Okay. Welcome, Stephen.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.